Hello everybody, my name is Karryshh and welcome back to another recap video. This time it's a Japanese horror, Cursed. Well, it was an old movie from 2004, but it was a hidden gem. A good scare watch for one night, and I think you will like this movie, so make sure to stick around till end. The movie follows the story of a cursed convenience store, which was pretty fun to watch. On top of that, if you're new to my channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. It is free for you and I find it motivating when people find my videos engaging. Now sit back and relax as I recap Cursed. So this story kicks off with a super creepy scene. We see two school friends walking home after school, and on their way, they pass by this convenience store. One of the girls decides to stop and grab a juice from the store, but the other one starts feeling really uneasy. She tells her friend that the store is really weird and scary and she doesn't want to go in. And then out of nowhere, a truck comes speeding in and brutally runs over that girl, killing her on the spot. Blood was everywhere. Now the scene cuts back in the past and we learn that the convenience store is called Mitsuya Mart. A girl named Nao arrives at the store and she was representing a big supermarket company. Behind the counter is a part-time worker named Ryoko, and as soon as Nao steps into the store, she gets this weird, unsettling vibe from that place. She ignores the feeling and introduces herself to Ryoko, saying that she's here to meet the store owner, Mr. Kitamura. That's when Mr. and Mrs. Kitamura shows up, and let me tell you, these two owners were super creepy. They immediately start scolding Nao, saying that she's late, but Nao was confused because according to her, she arrived right on time for their 2 p.m. meeting. However, when she looks at the clock, she was shocked because it was somehow already 4:30 p.m. Totally thrown off, Nao apologizes and heads into the meeting with the owners. But then Ryoko glances back at the clock and guess what? It was showing 2 again. After this, a sketchy guy in a hoodie walks into the store and starts browsing the magazine section. Ryoko doesn't really pay attention to him and just starts eating a bun. However, Mrs. Kitamura, oh my god, she's got her eyes on Ryoko through the security cameras because she thinks Ryoko's stealing money. At the same time, Mr. Kitamura is talking to Nao, and we find out that Nao's big supermarket company wants to buy Mitsuya Mart. Apparently, this isn't their first move. They already bought another store nearby. The other store owner had already accepted their offer, and the owner of that other store was named Teijima. Actually, Teijima was recently in a terrible accident, and both of his legs were amputated. Now, when Mr. Kitamura hears about this, he completely loses it and starts celebrating that amputation like a maniac because Teijima was his rival. Then Mrs. Kitamura pipes up, saying that if they do decide to sell the store, they're going to sell off all the inventory first. To do that, they'll need to make a detailed list of everything, and of course, they dumped that job on poor Nao. This is because Nao's company had assured the Kitamuras that they'd handle everything, and now Nao is stuck. Nao heads back to break this bad news to Ryoko, and the two of them start to chat for a bit and they kind of bond. But of course, Mrs. Kitamura is creepily watching him on security camera the whole time. Nao starts realizing just how strange this place is and thinks to herself that it definitely needs a makeover. Meanwhile, Mrs. Kitamura is acting totally unhinged and she almost climbed into the security camera. Now then goes to the storeroom and starts making the inventory list. And meanwhile, that weird hoodie guy, he was still in the magazine section, just standing there. Now as Nao was working on that list, she hears these eerie demonic whispers coming from behind her door. She gets curious and goes to check it out, but suddenly she hears this blaring noise so loud that it forces her to cover her ears. When the noise finally stops, she nervously approaches the door, opens it, and out of nowhere, this thick, black smoke pours out. It was super strange and downright terrifying. Meanwhile, Ryoko starts keeping an eye on that hoodie guy guy, trying to figure out what his deal is. But the guy, he was just standing there, completely still like a statue. Then another man walks into the store to buy something, and guess what? His total comes to 666 yen. And yeah, we all know what that number means. It was an evil number. The guy leaves the store with his stuff, but now the movie starts following him. While he's walking back home, he hears this creepy evil whispers coming from an apartment. Then out of shadows, a ball suddenly rolls towards him. He then hears the voice of a little girl coming from the darkness asking for her ball, and the guy makes a huge mistake of picking it up and walking into the darkness to return it. As he moves further into the shadows, he suddenly vanishes, like the darkness swallowed him whole, and the ball, it rolled back outside on the street. The scene cuts back to the convenience store, and it was nighttime now, and Ryoko finishes her shift and heads home. Now Komori, a guy who works the night shift, shows up for his turn. However, outside the store, this strange woman was sitting and staring at it. She starts smiling creepily when she sees Komori, and we're gonna see this woman in purple clothing a couple of times more before we finally figure out who she is. Then the movie shifts focus to Ryoko, who's heading back to the store the next day after school for her part-time job. When Ryoko arrives, she notices Mr. and Mrs. Kitamura standing behind the counter like statues. They don't even acknowledge her presence, and Ryoko just shrugs it off and heads to the storeroom where she finds Nao, who was still working on that endless inventory list. Poor Nao realizes that this task is going to take at least a week to finish. As they chat, Nao mentions how there's this weird negative energy in the store. Ryoko agrees and admits that it was true. She even says that's probably why so many people who come to work here end up quitting. However, for some reason, Ryoko hasn't experienced anything bad herself, at least not yet. And then Ryoko goes to work. She was working when she suddenly freezes because she catches a glimpse of something in the mirror. There was this demonic looking man standing behind her, but when she turned around, there was no one there. Meanwhile, Nao is still working on the list when she comes across an item that was expired 3 years ago. Frustrated, she storms off to confront Mr. and Mrs. Kitamura about it because it's making her job even harder. But when she tries to talk to him, they don't even respond. It's like she's talking to a couple of mannequins. Nao asks what's going on, but before she can get an answer, Mr. Kitamura starts yelling at her, accusing her of being crazy. At the same time, Mrs. Kitamura loses it too, screaming about that expired food and even accusing Nao of stealing. Nao was completely shocked to see this, but suddenly Ryoko screams. Nao rushes to check what happened to her and sees that a crow has crashed into the store window and died. And just as they're processing that, another crow smashes into the window and dies too. The sight of it leaves both Nao and Ryoko completely shaken. Nao tries to calm Ryoko down and sends her away, saying she'll take care of cleaning up the mess. Nao heads to the storeroom to grab cleaning supplies, ignoring the creepy presence of Mr. and Mrs. Kitamura sitting there, and when she gets back to where the dead crows were, her heart sinks, because Mr. and Mrs. Kitamura were already standing by the bodies, which should have been impossible. Then Mr. Kitamura starts hosing down all the blood with water, and both he and his wife begin laughing like maniacs. That's when Nao becomes certain something evil is going on in this place. Then night falls and Komori shows up early for his shift. As Ryoko gets ready to leave, Komori stops her and gives her some free groceries. Turns out, Komori has a little crush on her. Later, a customer comes into the shop and their total is 699 yen. They take their stuff and leave, and then another woman comes in, but her total was 999 yen, which flipped upside down is 666. She leaves with her grocery, but now the movie starts following her. On her way home, the woman notices that someone is following her, a figure carrying a huge hammer. She makes it to her building, grabs her mail, and waits for the elevator. But that's when she hears it, the sound of the hammer scraping against the ground. The figure executing some dark evil energy is slowly heading walking towards her. The woman was then terrified and she quickly gets into the elevator before the demon can reach her, but she was shaken badly. Meanwhile, the demon slowly makes its way up the stairs, and when the elevator stops, she sprints towards her apartment door, but just as she gets there, she realizes she dropped her keys at the end of the hallway. To make it worse, the demonic figure was now at the hallway too. The woman gathers all her courage and runs towards the demon, grabs her keys and barely dodges the hammer as it swings. The demon was moving slowly, which gives her just enough time to unlock her apartment door and gets inside. She slams the door shut, but now the demon starts banging on it from the outside. Terrified, she collapses to the floor and starts crying, but suddenly her TV turns on by itself. Completely panicked, she hides under her heated table and turns on the heater, but then her phone rings. The woman decides to pick up the phone, and to her horror, it was the demon speaking on the other end. Before she can react, the demon suddenly appeared behind her curtains and froze her in fear. And obviously, in the end, the demon unalives her. So yeah, it's pretty clear now, whoever buys something from the store with a total of 666 or 999 is cursed and ends up dead. The next day, while Nao is working on the inventory list, she gets a call from Teijima, the same guy who lost both his legs in the accident. Teijima asks her in a really strange way if she's still there. Nao doesn't really understand what he means, but Teijima starts venting about how he's the only one without legs, while everyone else around him still has theirs. Now here was the weird part. Nao can't actually hear what Teijima is saying cause of the curse. All she can hear is a loud ringing noise in her ears. The call ends with Teijima throwing his phone in frustration, clearly depressed about his condition. Now actually see, Teijima is not really cursed, but the movie is still showing him for a purpose that we will find out in the end. Meanwhile, Mrs. and Mr. Kitamura are standing outside their shop, staring at the door and laughing because they can hear strange whispers. At the same time, we see that creepy woman again, the one we saw earlier. This time though, she's standing outside with a baby stroller, just staring directly at the store with no reason. Inside the shop, Ryoko is organizing items in the freezer when suddenly she sees a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness, which scares her. Then Komori shows up and once again gives Ryoko some free groceries and calms her down. Out of this, Ryoko heads home and a new customer comes into the store. The customer's total is 444 yen. But then Komori starts freaking out because this customer is the same hooded guy from before. His face is completely shrouded in darkness, but in the end, Komori relents to the curse. A hooded guy then hypnotizes Komori and Komori leaves into the darkness of the guy's hood, which was really creepy. Meanwhile, Nao is still working on the inventory list when she hears Komori screaming. She rushes to find him sitting on the floor, visibly shaken. The hooded man silently leaves the store, but when Nao tries to check on Komori, she notices one of his eyes has become unnaturally large and evil. This means the curse has now passed on to Komori. Komori clings to Nao, crying in fear, but then another customer, a young woman, let's just call her Alice, walks into the store. Nao helps Alice in the store, but she also keeps glancing nervously at Komori, because one of his eyes was extremely creepy. Now Alice's total comes out to 666 yen, and yeah, you already know what that means. Alice is doomed now too. Alice takes her groceries and leaves, and shortly after, Ryoko returns to the store, but she was horrified to see Komori in such bad shape and she asks what's going on. However, Nao doesn't want Ryoko to get involved in all this, so she reassures her and sends her home saying she'll take care of Komori. Ryoko then leaves, the creepy owner starts laughing again, and then another customer comes in. Let's just call him Alex. And he was a guy buying shampoo and conditioner. Alex's total is 907 yen at first, but then he hears strange whispers in his ear, and those whispers convince him to buy a bun as well. This makes his total 999 yen, and yeah, that means the curse is coming for him too. The scene cuts to Alice, who reaches home, unpacks her grocery and starts listening to voicemails from her husband, who was coming home later. She turns on TV where they're reporting a story about a 4-year-old boy who was murdered. Meanwhile, Alex arrives at a bathhouse to take a bath, and the same murder news is playing there too. At the same time, Ryoko, on her way home, also hears the news from a nearby screen. The way the news ties all three of them together makes it clear that something evil is going to happen to each of them. After the news ends, Alice turns off her TV and starts focusing on her tasks. Meanwhile, Alex gets creeped out because the entire place seems completely deserted. To make things worse, he finds a blood-stained towel lying around. Meanwhile, Ryoko notices the hooded figure from before, and out of fear but also curiosity, she begins following him. However, after a while, she changes her mind and takes a different route. Back at the bathhouse, Alex is washing his hair when suddenly long strands of hair, clearly a woman, starts coming out of his head. At the same time, Alice feels a strange presence behind her, which makes her uneasy. Things escalate quickly and the hooded figure appears now directly in front of Ryoko, and she freezes in fear. In the bathhouse, we see suddenly a ghost of a woman right next to Alex, and at home, Alice was working on dinner when her fridge suddenly locks itself. Then the kitchen lights go out and the fridge door swings open on its own, but she stares in disbelief as a dark, cursed pathway seems to extend inside the fridge, leading into complete darkness. Alice panics and slams the fridge door shut. The lights come back on and she cautiously opens the fridge again, but this time without warning. A terrifying ghost of a woman appears inside the fridge, scaring the life out of her. Meanwhile, Ryoko was now running for her life, trying to escape the hooded figure, but no matter where she went, he was right there following her. Suddenly, he grabbed her and tried to push her onto the train tracks as a train approached. Back in the kitchen, the ghost starts crawling out of the fridge and starts moving towards Alice. She was so terrified that she couldn't even run. But then the ghost crept behind her and suddenly grabbed her from the back. In desperation, the girl stabbed the ghost in the neck with a knife, and at the same time, in the bathhouse, Alex slipped, fell hard and passed out. The scene turned super intense, and now in the kitchen, Alice realized she hadn't stabbed the ghost. She had accidentally killed her husband instead. She was absolutely horrified, and back in the bathhouse, Alex, when regained consciousness, he sees an old man standing over him. The man then suddenly grabbed Alex's head and slammed it into a slab, killing him instantly. But here was the twist. That old man was the same killer from the news, the one who murdered the 4-year-old boy. Turns out he owned the bathhouse, and Alex ended up there because he was cursed. I mean, of all places in the world, he just happened to pick the one run by a murderer. Now back in the kitchen, Alice, now overwhelmed with guilt, ended up taking her own life. In their couple's photo, we see Alice's face was replaced by the eerie ghost that haunted her. Now Ryoko was the only one left, and luckily just as the train passed by, the hooded figure vanished and she survived. The next day, after that terrifying night, Ryoko goes back to work and is completely shaken. She was horrified to see Komori has ended up just like Mr. and Mrs. Kitamura. Seeing this, Ryoko breaks down and starts crying. That's when the strange woman we've been seeing outside the store since the beginning approaches her. Her name was Tsukiko, and she tells Ryoko to come with her, saying this place isn't safe. Tsukiko seemed a little off, and she was pushing a baby stroller with a creepy doll inside. But even so, Ryoko decides to follow her. They go to a park where Tsukiko starts telling her a story. Apparently, Mr. and Mrs. Kitamura weren't always the store owners. The store has been sold over and over again, and every single owner ends up losing their minds, just like the Kitamuras did. Then we learn something even darker. The original owner of the store was actually a serial killer who murdered a ton of people. Tsukiko reveals that this guy wouldn't pay the employees he hired to work at the store. Instead, he'd kill them to cash in on their employee insurance policies. That's when Nao appears in the park and Ryoko calls her over, and now both women listens to the story. Actually, you see, when the store was built, the owner didn't use concrete. He stole tombstones from a nearby cemetery, ground them up, and used the remains to construct the store. The entire place is literally built from the graves of dead people. The person who helped build the store died in a truck accident shortly after the store was built, and no one really knows what happened to original owner after that. Hearing all this, Ryoko was completely shaken. Sukiko, on the other hand, starts laughing maniacally and just walks away, leaving Ryoko and now stunned. At this point, it was clear the store isn't just cursed, it's a magnet for all kinds of evil. The ghosts and spirits we've been seeing, they don't even have a clear origin. Some are wandering spirits from the cemetery, and other are the souls of people the original owner murdered. Now Ryoko and Nao talk about everything that's been happening, and this is where a secret gets revealed. Both Ryoko and Nao have been able to see ghosts since they were kids. Ryoko's ability is a little weaker, while Nao's is stronger, but she always ignored that feeling. However, ever since she entered that store, the spirits have been bothering her, something that never happened before. Ryoko feels that if they don't do something, that store is going to drive them both insane, and just then, the swings nearby start moving on their own. Ryoko and Nao decide that they'll never go back to that store again, and they start walking out of the park, but then the swings get tangled up in each other. Now on her way home, Ryoko spots a poly bag that belongs to the store. Seeing it, she remembers Komori, who was completely under the curse's control. She doesn't want to leave her friend behind, so she now rushes back to the cursed store to save Komori. Meanwhile, Komori is sitting in the storeroom when suddenly he sees demonic eyes in the dark inside a trash bin. Ryoko arrives just in time at the store and starts banging on the back door, which is locked. The evil presence then started to pull Komori into the trash bin, but before anything worse can happen, Ryoko pulls him out of there. She immediately shut the door, but right after that, Komori disappears. Ryoko searches everywhere for Komori but can't find him. She runs outside the store and eventually finds him by a river where he's bathing. She immediately runs to him, pulls him out of the river and comforts him. Komori starts crying because after leaving that cursed store, the effect of the curse on him has lessened and he's starting to regain his senses. Now they both sit by the river for a while and eventually Komori becomes normal again. Ryoko takes him home with her, but here's the thing. Komori had left his work uniform in the river and now it was giving off this demonic whispering, which means that uniform is cursed. The scene shifts to Nao, who's on her way home when she suddenly sees an empty wheelchair in front of her. She was confused because there was no one around, but then she gets a call from Teijima. He starts saying strange things on the phone and suddenly, Teijima appears on the road in front of her. And get this, Teijima's feet are back to normal. On the phone, Teijima says he's in a beautiful place, but we realize that Teijima isn't really there. That was his spirit coming to say goodbye because Teijima had committed unalignment out of depression. Now also says goodbye to Teijima and leaves to head home, and that was what Teijima's role was in this movie. Actually, you see, we just found out that Nao can see ghosts, and this scene was relevant to that because Teijima was visible to Nao, even though he was not related to that cursed store. Now on her way home, she passes by that cursed store one last time, and this time we see two schoolgirls getting off the bus near the store. These two girls were the same ones we saw at the beginning of the movie. Now walks past them, and in the final scene we finally find out what the girl saw inside the store before the accident. Actually, you see, she had seen hundreds of spirits inside the store, which made the place completely filled with them, and that's why the girl had the accident because she was terrified. The movie ends here, and the takeaway is anyone who steps into that store will fall victim to the curse. So this was the recap video on the movie Karryshh, and I hope you have liked this one. If you have, then please subscribe the channel and give this video a thumbs up. I really need your support to grow further. If you wanna watch this movie, there's a link to my Telegram channel in the description box. If that link does not work, just go to Telegram and put my channel's name in the search bar. I'm mostly active on Insta, so you can follow me there as well. And look into my other channel where we discuss about the mysteries of the world. All the links are in the description box. For now, I'll see you all in the next one. Till then, stay awake, cause they always see you.